Thank you. Thank you, Randy. I'm going to be honest with you this morning. I'm a little tired, and I told Karen I'm a little weepy. When I get tired, I get weepy. There are things going on in our family that I can really sense your prayers. I really sense you guys are with us. And I just have some thank yous before I get started. Many of you know my mom. She had a fall a couple of weeks ago. Many of you have heard her talk through the years. She's had an impact on life, and I'm learning a whole new phase about Mom. I knew she was funny, but I didn't know she could be funny in the moment. And before I share how family and friends and Team Right has come around us, some of the team is here today. I just want to share with you a little quip. When Mom first got into Emmanuel Hospital, I was there. I just happened to be there when they were giving her a cognitive test. And they said, your name, Alice. She got that. And how old are you? 92. Well, I said, Mom, you're 93. She missed that by a year, but she was doing very well. They said, where are you today? And she looked at me. And I said, well, Mom, don't look at me. They're asking you the questions. And she said, well, I don't know. And then, no, the lady said, well, where are you today? Not the city, maybe, but she didn't know the city, but where are you today? And she said, Emmanuel Medical Center. Well, the lady said, that's great. That's awesome, Mrs. Wright. How did you know that? She said, I read the chart behind me. So now hang in there. I got a few more throughout this message. My mom is pretty perceptive, and she actually gave me one of the points today that I'm going to share with you. But I did mention Team Right, and today's message, if you get nothing else out of this message, Carol picked some beautiful songs. Oh, for grace to trust him more. Jesus, Jesus, how I trust him. The reason you can trust him is because if you're an unbeliever or not, God is sovereignly in control of the events of your life, whether you want to believe that or not. And I just want to share with you, in my personal little world, we oftentimes talk, is this irony? Is this chance? What is going on here? Well, you tell me. I'm looking at Sherry Larson, and she's going like this. When my dad died, she just happened to be working on the top floor. She never goes in to the top floor, but she just happened to be working there on that shift on that particular day, and Sherry was able to help at the end of my dad's life. My sister-in-law, Luann, she hasn't visited us in Turlock since Reggie's wedding. So she happens to show up. She's a 35-year career nurse. She happens to show up the day or 2 days after my mom fell. Reggie and Lindy have been on a trip for 2 years, almost 2 years. We haven't seen them. They just happened to show up, and they encouraged us to get an ambulance a couple nights before, and we did. And Lindy ended up being with Luann all day with me in the emergency room, giving Mom. I'll tell you what, you want a new care pastorette? Call Lindy. She is phenomenal, and we just had. I just watched a great time. And then, of course, my brother and sister-in-law, Randy, has done yeoman's work for us the last whole week. So God is sovereign in who he brings around in your life at a particular time. And you're going to see a setup for this today as we look into the book of Esther. And before my brother Dave reads, I would like you to take out in your bulletin, you have a chart. I would like you to look at the chart. And also, if you would, before Dave reads, I want to give you a historical context. Oftentimes, not in a bad way, we take off reading scripture without not knowing a little bit of the background. What are we reading? These books in the Bible. If you could cut the book of Esther out of scripture, it actually goes between the chapters 6 and 7 of the book of Ezra. That's where it goes in chronology. So if you want to get a good chronological background of what's happening, look at the book of Second Chronicles and also the book of Ezra, and you will see what the Bible background tells you about Esther. Now, I've tried to give a little synopsis here before Dave reads chapter 1 today. And by the way, Pastor Rick, thank you for giving Augie and I a chance. We're really looking forward to this. We're off on a 10-week series in the book of Esther. Each of us are taking 3 messages, and it's a delight to share the Word of God with you. It's oftentimes we get the biggest benefit. We learn and we interact with God all week, and we're better for doing it. And then we get a chance to come and share with you. So if you look at where does Esther fit into the biblical timeline? If you look at that, this timeline features 2 of the 4 world powers that are spoken of in the book of Daniel. There's Assyria, and then Babylonia became a world conqueror. You can look at Daniel chapters 2 and 7 if you want to spend time on Daniel's vision, and he will tell you the prophecy of the world leaders. But there was Assyria, and then there was Babylon, and during the Babylonian rule, you'll notice that in 587 BC, Israel was taken captive, and the Jews, they're called the Jews of the diaspora, the scattered Jews all around the world. They were taken from their homeland in Judah, taken to Babylon for a 70-year captivity. 70 years after that, notice your timeline there, in 539 BC, Cyrus, king of Judah, conquered Babylon. So there was a new world ruler. That would be Persia. Persia conquered Babylon. And so Persia is the world ruler, and it forms the backdrop of the book of Esther. When we read this, you notice Persia went from 539 BC to 321 BC. And you'll notice that the book of Esther in 483 BC to 473 BC takes place during a 10-year period during that time. So Esther is part of the backdrop of Persian rule. King Xerxes is a Persian king. Now, notice there, so if you want to fill in your outline, it's after the Babylonian captivity in 587. It's during Persian rule, and there's a ruler that we're going to look at. In fact, Augie, did you fish out a slide for King Xerxes? Is there a slide to throw up? Okay, we don't have one, but let me describe Xerxes for you. Hot-tempered, infidelity, full of infidelity, a lavish spender. He was spoiled rotten, and he was a rich brat. And he had taken the rule from his grandfather and father before him. And during his rule, about 581 or 582, just before chapter 1 is chronicled, the chapter we look at today, Xerxes was going back to Greece for a war to try and clean up a mess that his dad had left. His dad was defeated. And so Xerxes went back. We'll tell you about the war later. But all of that forms a background. So what he's going to do today is rally a nation to go to war. And we'll see how he does it. Xerxes' name, Hebrew name, we were talking about this in our staff prayer meeting today, trying to pronounce it. It's Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus. And you're going to see afterwards that if you have trouble with that, just call him King A and you fill in the blank. Because he is one of those, and he'll show that today. So King Ahasuerus is the Hebrew name for Xerxes. And then And then there is a decree that I want to alert you with. If you go back to the date on your timeline, 539 BC, there was a decree that Cyrus gave right when he took office as a Persian king, and you can look at it in 2 Chronicles 36. And this decree allowed Jews to come back into their homeland from the land of Persia. Now, in Deuteronomy 28, there was a prophecy of the Jews to return to their homeland. So if you picture this, there's about 2 million to 3 million Jews scattered abroad around the earth. Well, guess what? How many do you think came back? No, only about 50,000. So they speculate that 1.5 to 2 million were still scattered abroad in the land. So this book is actually about disobedient Jews that decided to stay in Persia because life was pretty good in Persia. They didn't come back to the land. But what's interesting about this book is that the first readers of this book would be those that came back into the land. And they would be encouraged by reading the book because they would see that God had not given up on their brothers, even though they opted for second best in their lives. God was still in control in their brothers' lives. So with that, Brother David, would you read us as we all turn to the book of Esther, chapter 1, and we're going to be working our way through this book in the next couple of minutes. So Dave, read us Esther chapter 1.
Names in this chapter, some of which I'm sure will shortly show up in our nursery. This is what happened during the time of Xerxes. The Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Kush. At that time, King Xerxes reigned from his royal throne in the citadel of Susa. And in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a banquet for all his nobles and officials. The military leaders of Persia and Media, the princes and the nobles of the provinces were present. For a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. When these days were over, the king gave a banquet lasting 7 days in the enclosed garden of the king's palace for all the people, from the least to the greatest, who were in the citadel of Susa. The garden had hangings of white and blue linen, fastened with cords of white linen and purple material to silver rings on marble pillars. There were couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of porphyry, marble, mother of pearl, and other costly stones. Wine was served in goblets of gold, each one different from the other. And the royal wine was abundant, in keeping with the king's liberality. By the king's command, each guest was allowed to drink in his own way, for the king instructed all the wine stewards to serve each man what he wished. Queen Vashti also gave a banquet for the women in the royal palace of King Xerxes. On the 7th day, when King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine, he commanded the 7 eunuchs who worked for him, Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Karsus, to bring him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown, in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. But when the attendants delivered the king's command, Queen Vashti refused to come. Then the king became furious and burned with anger. Since it was customary for the king to consult experts in matters of law and justice, he spoke with the wise men who understood the times and were closest to the king: Karshina, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Meres, Marsina, and
That's okay.
Memucan,
Keep
the
it going.
seven, the 7 nobles of Persia and Media. who had special access to the king and were highest in the kingdom. According to the law, what must be done to Queen Vashti? He asked. She has not obeyed the command of King Xerxes that the eunuchs have taken to her. Then Memucan replied, in the presence of the king and the nobles, Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but against all the nobles and peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and so they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes, command Queen Vashti to be brought before him. And say, I'm sorry, I lost my spot there. King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, but she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of the nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Therefore, if it pleases the king, let him issue a royal decree, and let it be written in the laws of Persia and Media that cannot be repealed, that Vashti is never again to enter the presence of King Xerxes. Also let the king give her royal position to someone else who is better than she. Then when the king's edict is proclaimed throughout his vast realm, all the women will respect their husbands, from the least to the greatest. The king and his nobles were pleased with this advice. So the king did as Memucan proposed. He sent dispatches to all parts of the kingdom, to each province in his own script, and to each people in its own language, proclaiming in each people's tongue that every man should be ruler over his own household.
Augie, there's a key concepts chart. If you don't get it, that's no big deal. But you can look in your chart here, and in the center of your chart, there's a curious fact that you're going to want to follow as we go through this book the next 10 weeks. First, God is never mentioned in this book. It's like a theological curveball on your notes. God is never mentioned. And there is an invitation, though, even though he's never mentioned, for you as the reader to look for God's activity. There's coincidence and ironic reversal. This is a court tale. Do you know what a court tale is? Court tales are told in the king's court, and they're classic short stories. This is a beautiful, you're going to see a beautiful story the next 10 weeks. There's a hero that's going to emerge in this story very early. You're going to follow this person through the next 10 weeks. There's a villain. And the villain looks like he's in charge. And during a classic court tale, what happens is there's an unbelievable reversal of fortune. And so oftentimes the villain looks like he's going to win, but after the reversal of fortune, the hero ends up more prosperous, more prominent, and their legacy goes on. So come on back. It's one of the great short stories ever told. And why would we think it not? Because it's written in the Word of God, and God's Word is inspired. It's in perfect symmetry, and this chart will help you follow the story as we go through. So let's dive into chapter 1 with your chart by you. Notice the setting and display for this story. This is a 180 royal display of wealth. And you'll note that Xerxes had this party. And those that were in the party, if you would look at a map, he invites 127 provinces from, note in verse 1, from India to Cush. Now, India was smattered in Egypt that day, to Cush, which would be modern-day Ethiopia. You'll notice the map on the board, and as he invited the 127 provinces there, these were the modern-day countries of Iran, Turkey, the conflict in Iran. This is the nation we're reading about. Over 4,000 years ago. Iran, Turkey, Egypt, parts of Central Asia, Pakistan, Thrace and Macedonia, Afghanistan, Iraq, and here are the provinces that he began to invite, those from in the south. They were Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel was invited because they were in exile, and some of them in Africa, from India to Kush. So it's a huge world rule, and he went and handpicked all of the officials and staff of the army of Media Persia, you'll notice in verse 3, and the nobles and the officials from all of these provinces. His reason in verse 4, to display his glorious wealth of his kingdom and the magnificent splendor of his greatness. Now he did this for 180 days, so this is a 6-month power display of his splendor and wealth. And whenever the word splendor is used with wealth, it elicits honor. So what the king is trying to do is lap up honor as he has gone throughout the whole nation to curry their favor and raise money for his impending war with Greece. Now I just have a thought. Can everybody stand up? We're going to try to get through this passage, but stand up, turn to your neighbor. We're going to have a contest. And tell them where the most opulent, wealthiest place you ever have been. Say it really quickly. Opulent, wealthiest place. We know we have world travelers here. Turn to your neighbor. Let them know the most opulent, wealthiest place. Okay, great. I got to stop you now. We're going to have a contest. Let's see which side won. This side, shout it out. What's an opulent place that you've been from? Here, anybody? Shout it out. St. Patrick's Cathedral. Can this side top that? What was so opulent about it, Sharon?
Oh, gosh, I've been there 20 times and just seen so many new things. It's amazing. It's amazing. You really feel you're in the presence of something going on.
All right. How about this side? Anybody beat St. Patrick's Cathedral? Anybody have a thought? All right. St. Patrick's wins. Yeah. Yes, there are some opulent places around the world. Well, what the king did was he went and borrowed the officers and brought his army to the most opulent place that he had in that particular time, and that was his winter palace in Susa. And so look at verse 5. Verse 5 says, after he displayed his glorious wealth and was seeking all the honor from them, then he held a week-long, 7-day banquet. After the 6-month show and tell, Artaxerxes got everybody in the garden courtyard. And here came a week-long banquet. Now, in this day and age, the ancient kings prided themselves on who could throw the largest banquet. Oftentimes, they had banquet-offs or to see how many could come. And here they come, by not the thousands, but by the tens of thousands. King Ashurbanipal from Assyria, the nation that ruled before, once boasted that 69,574 people came to his banquet. So these were not small things. These were full of lavishness, excess, control, and pride. And the king, this author that wrote Esther, is keenly aware or keenly acquainted with Persia's cultural best. This was probably the largest gazebo at that time and was flanked by beautiful royal gardens at the Winter Palace. This drips of lavishness. The banquet was set up there, and it's drips of excessiveness and lavishness. Now, I want you to close your eyes for a minute and just visualize how the author wrote this. He wrote this in detail. Envision the largest gazebo that you've ever seen. Let me read verse 6. It was at the fortress of Susa, and white and violet linen hangings were fastened with the white and purple linen cords to silver rods on marble columns. Gold and silver couches were arranged on a mosaic pavement of red feldspar marble, mother of pearl and precious stones. Now, while your eyes are closed, just picture this. Picture a huge, huge white marble columned gazebo. We don't know exactly how big it was, but in between those columns were kingly royal. That's the literal thing. Inside this beautiful Asia, they spared no expense. And the absence of wine here is not meant to convey a sense of debauchery, but more the idea of wealth and opulence. Remember what Xerxes is trying to do. He's trying to curry money for his impending war with Greece. Now, the lesson here for us is human power often shows itself off. We see this in our age, a modern day example of what's going on here. Do you remember China's military display last July 25th? Same type of thing. They're showing all their military prowess. I think they had surface-to-air missiles, 3 different types, land, air, and sea. And even Donald Trump was impressed. And so these leaders have been doing this for years. Solomon says nothing's new under the sun, and that's what they're doing here. There's a transition point that I want to make here. When we go out into a garden, the purpose of that is to go back to the original Garden of Eden and think of perfection and ask God to help you cleanse your soul when you go outside and worship the Lord. This particular situation here was 180-degree opposite. This couldn't have been further from a spiritual awakening. This was an opulent, we'll see as time goes on. But right in the middle, there's a break in this. Look at verse 9. Queen Vashti, she was having a banquet in another part of the palace. Now, the estate there was full of buildings, and it would have been no problem for Vashti to hold a banquet for the people in her realm. And the people there were the wives of the nobility, their mothers, brothers, cousins, and she was doing that. Oftentimes a queen was supposed to accompany her king in the events, but she's eerily, strangely absent. Why? Remember, God's sovereignty is working this situation behind the scenes. And so here's the turning point in the story. Notice, if you're following in your notes, a drunken command. Perhaps the thought of an impending war with Greece triggered the excess in the drink. But the king commands Vashti to appear. Let's read verses 10 through 12. Notice the king's drinks were flowing, and on the 7th day, the king called all of his servants, and Dave, you did a great job. I'm not going to attempt to do that. The 7 eunuchs who personally served him to bring Queen Vashti out before with her royal crown. He wanted to show her beauty off. And because she was, note this word, she was very beautiful. Now, we don't know why Vashti refuses. There's all kinds of suggestions. Probably it was beneath her dignity. We don't know. Suggestions abound. Concubines were usually on display, not queens. There are thoughts that she may have been pregnant with Ahasuerus' son and didn't want to go. We actually don't know, but what we do know is that the English text translates, and all English text translates, that she was very beautiful. Literally, it says in the ancient language of Hebrew that I want to read the literal phrase, for her beauty, she was beautiful to behold. The word behold is not found in this phrase in the English Bible, but the word behold occupies 23 slots in the Old Testament, with 16 of these slots leading up to the book of Esther. And each time in the 16 slots leading up, the word is used with beholding the form and features of a beautiful woman. So what is going on, we don't know exactly, but we know one thing. We can say Esther knew what awaited her. The command of the king was a law, and she was commanded to come. And she knew that on the other side of the command was an inebriated royal class of drunken military men. And, and she could just imagine what was coming. Cat calls, you name it. And it was beneath her dignity, and so she stood for herself. May I add, she knew who she was. And in her heart, she is not just a beauty queen, she is a very beautiful person. She was a beautiful woman inside and out, not only on the outside, but on the inside. And so this woman resists absolute power. This was done in a world that was unthink of. I was with my mom. I was telling her I was preaching on King Vashti, and she said, we were talking about this point. She said, life can get tricky sometimes. And then she said, she quoted this verse, guard your heart with all diligence, because out of it come the issues of life. And I said, Mom, that's an awesome verse. I said, do you know where that's found? And she said, no. And I said, well, let me ask Siri. So I punched my phone, and she said, can you get that guy in there every time? But what was happening here was Vashti took a step for herself in a culture where this was unthinkable. This was a male-dominated culture. And I can just imagine Ahasuerus motioning his servants and snapping his fingers because he gets anything he wants. And he's drunk, and he says, go get her. And one of his servants comes back and said, she didn't come. And he was furious. He was enraged. And he had when you're angry, you're not in control of your thoughts. And so they panic. And the king consults his advisors. And look at verse 13 and 14. The king consulted the wise men who understood the times. And these were the most trusted men. They were in the king's cabinet. And all of these names, the one listed last, Memucan, is certainly listed last here, but he's not the least. This guy rises up, and he basically dictates policy for the whole kingdom. So he rises up, and he says, hey, I know what we're going to do. If we don't do something fast, they're panicking. All the women in verse 17 are going to start doing this. And so implied, they've already seen what she's done. This is going to have a trickle-down effect, not only on the women of nobility, but all the women throughout the province. We have to do something fast. And they panic. And the result is a wide decrees about male authority. And so what they did was they formed a law that put women under subjection to men's thumbs. Now, guess what? You can't legislate morality. Morality is a matter of the heart. And King Ahasuerus would be very sorry for the consequences of this throughout his kingdom. Why? Because he didn't follow God. He had no clue. But the point is, God was using him as a pawn to do something better. The king consults his advisors. They panic. They say all women are doing this. And the result is a decree about male authority. And so they are in trouble. Now, this overreaction tells us that there's a lesson in this. Insecure power overreacts to loss of control. This was the king's problem. He was a very insecure man. He had no relationship to God, but God was using him Finally, the last point, what is really happening in this story? Even though God is not mentioned, Vashti is removed. God was working behind the scenes because of her standing up for her dignity, and she was removed. The decree said, let Vashti never enter into the Lord's presence again. And also, the decree said, let all people, all women of the kingdom begin to respect their husbands, begin to be in subjection to their husbands. So, there's a vacancy created in the queenship. And we will watch in the next couple weeks as a young Jewish girl will begin to step in. And everyone come back, because you will see, as Augie presents to us next week, that God has waiting in the wings something very special for the land of Israel. I want to call your attention to something at this time. There's a man named Alex Witt that has a very good comment on this. The sacred writer makes us respect Queen Vashti and all her disgusting surroundings. Whatever the royal order that came to her out of the banquet hall exactly was, the brave queen refused to obey it. Her beauty was her own and her husband's. It was not open for show amongst half-drunk men. And in the long run, much of the night's evil work was that Vashti was dismissed into disgrace and banishment. Only let us take heed to note that the sacred writer's whole point in this is that the divine hand was all the time overruling Ahasuerus' brutality. God was in control of this at all times. And I want to just talk to us a little bit before Pastor Rick comes and leads us in communion this morning. Yeah, here we go. Yeah. I just want to encourage you, before we go to communion this morning, this is a 4,000-year-old story, but it is relatable as it was then to today. I remember Carol and we would pray oftentimes for the kids at Turlock Christian. And every springtime about this time, the kids probably thought I was crazy. But I spent a lot of time subbing over there and got to know them. And it was interesting that every time about springtime I'd have this talk. I'd say, Mr. and Mrs. Wright, pray for you guys. And we've observed that over the years, there's about 200 kids we've interacted with. Many of them have gone on to different things, probably way more than that. But every once in a while, we'd see about 2 to 4 that would come up pregnant. And I'd say to the kids, girls, guard your hearts. Don't let anyone take you down. The men operate by the eye gate, and women operate by the ear gate. And guard your hearts. Don't let anyone whisper sweet nothings to you and fall for that. I don't want to see you come back pregnant to a life of poverty and impoverishment, and just by a bad choice. And so I talked to the guys. I'd say, guys, they thought I was crazy, but the next girl you kiss should be your wife. And oftentimes that filters into our marriages. We sometimes flirt with things we shouldn't. You know, we look at King Ahasuerus, and we're all guilty of the same thing. You know, 25% of marriages either are bound in an emotional adultery or adultery actually happens. Pastors are no different. 8 in 100 have confessed to an adulterous affair. So it's part of all of us. So this Communion Sunday, take a look at this chapter and realize that God's in control. God is in control of all nations, but he's in control of your lives individually to the point where you submit to the Lord's will and follow hard after his commandments. I had a guy in my men's Bible study for years. His name was Gilbert Prendez. He said, when you look at a woman, look from the neck up. And so, men, I want to encourage you. You have a precious, precious wife that God has given you. And use this communion time to restore beautiful thoughts for your wife. And just want to read Charles Swindoll's comment. Listen to this. Be careful, men. It says he's been in the ministry for more than 35 years. And he says, I've seen everything, and I'm virtually unshockable. But every once in a while, I've had to suck in my breath when I hear that some men demanded from their wives, calling it submission. It is rather insulting and shameful. So a word of warning here, men. Be careful. What you ask of the woman that God has given you, be certain that it doesn't assault her dignity as a person or turn a precious human being created in God's image into a sexual object for your own carnal gratification. And oftentimes people don't want to preach on this, but this is in the scriptures. So when we come to the table, renew your passion for the wife that God has given you. And young people, don't be one of those 2%. Guard your hearts. Remember, be diligent to guard your hearts, because out of your heart flow the issues of life. Pastor Rick?